One Piece's most recent chapter, 1043, ends in an internet-dividing mountain hanger that nobody can stop talking about. Couple that with a break next week, and I am jonesing for One Piece even more than my usual diagnosis demands. That hunger can only be sated by the release of 1044, but I needed something to act as a stopgap, and for this past week, that's been 2019's One Piece Worldseeker. If there was ever a gaping hole in my review catalog, it's this game here. I love One Piece and cover its games all of the time, and despite the fact that this title released firmly after this channel's founding, I've still never covered it. And the why is pretty simple. It previewed bad, it reviewed bad, it looked bad, and that's all for the unsurprising reason that it is bad. I don't exactly have the world's hottest take here. The internet at large was sort of collectively disappointed by this one, and I think the only area where I differ is that I didn't have high enough expectations to be let down in the first place. As much as my heart yearns to be the defender of the downtrodden, I can't go to bat for games about my favorite series that are this poor in quality, only encouraging the cycle to continue. So while I take no joy in dunking on games, and that's certainly not my goal here, I will quantify why Worldseeker is a game I'll never boot up again, but I want to start with a full plot synopsis. I normally don't believe in divorcing a story from the greater picture, but you'll have to take my word for it that this video game is at its best when you take the game out of it. Spoilers ahead, which can be skipped by going to the next chapter. One Piece Worldseeker isn't a particularly long game. A critical path playthrough can be done in under 8 hours, and there's no way that a storyline comparable to any of the 1000 chapter manga's stories can be told. And to its credit, Worldseeker realizes this, and tells a tale whose scope is more in line with some of the movies and the OVAs that One Piece has under its hat. There are 3 characters at the center of the plot: Luffy, Jean, and Isaac. Isaac is warden of the flying sky prison of our setting, Prison Island, a land named such for its growing military presence and the increase of pirate incarcerations that come thereafter. But Prison Island is a land divided. Neighbor is against neighbor and brother is against brother, because the Montagues and Capulets of our story are a pro- and anti-Navy faction respectively, the latter of which is headed by John. The Straw Hats become involved based on a rumor of Prison Island holding some sort of secret treasure. They arrive in the pre-game cutscene only to discover that there is no treasure, and an ambush was waiting for them. They narrowly escape this trap laid by Isaac, but are split up in the process, leading to the first major gameplay quest of finding all the crewmates scattered throughout the isle. You go to each corner of the island one quest at a time to release them from their prisons, and become acclimated to the lay of the land, all while keeping John apprised of the goings-on. Once the Straw Hat crew is whole again, we get the mid-game twist that John and Isaac are siblings. Their mother was the former leader of the island who died in the midst of a pirate-marine conflict, and clearly they're grieving her death in very different ways. Isaac has essentially gone no contact with John and refuses to explain why the military occupation is growing worse and worse while he stands idly by. There are a few hours of inconsequential quests in the middle as you work with John to help random villagers solve their problems and heal the schism at the town's heart. And the next time we get some important story bits is when we find out why the military has taken such an interest in Prison Island. Jewel Island, its name before occupation, was home to a rare and natural substance known as the Dynastones. These stones can be used to wield epic power. They are essentially just in-universe nuclear bombs. Isaac had a relationship with the military to research and collect Dynastones for them, but when the time came to honor the second half of that relationship, he turned out to have his own plans for the stones. The rumors of the treasure that drew the Straw Hats to the island in the first place were put into the world by him intentionally, hoping to draw a large amount of big-name pirates, which would in turn draw in a large amount of big-name Marines to stop them, and consequently leave the Marine HQ of Marijois unguarded and susceptible to a Dynastone bomb, all in the name of vengeance for his dead mother, and despite the party that he held most responsible. The game's final act takes place as Isaac uses his flying sky prison as a vehicle to deliver this bomb. It is only by punching him that you can make him realize the error of his ways, and after the climactic final battle, he realizes that his vengeance is not what his mom would have wanted, and instead chooses to steer the sky prison into the ocean to detonate the bombs away from any civilians, sacrificing himself in the process, and leaving Jean without closure on her relationship with her brother, yet optimistic for the future of the fate of the island in her hands. It's far from the most gripping One Piece content you'll ever consume, but being passable puts it a few notches above what most of Worldseeker has to offer. What my summary neglected to mention is the fact that there are like a dozen characters from the franchise that are just unceremoniously dropped into the story and don't actually do anything to move it forward, but instead act as deliverers of side quests, which brings me to the game itself. I like the idea of One Piece World Seeker. It's a One Piece game that places adventure and exploration above fighting. It takes place in an open world that's largely free for you to explore from the very beginning. The vehicle of that exploration comes from World Seeker's Luffy-centric design, which feels like a bold choice when the source material practically has an ensemble cast. The base game builds the world around you playing a single character and moveset, with his iconic ability to rocket himself around off of buildings and trees. The world is divided into a few unique districts, and within each of those districts you'll have a spattering of collection-based quests to complete and treasures to unlock, a tally of which is located on the map itself. In many ways, it feels like a take on the Ubisoft style of open world sandbox, and it's also playable proof that those games don't get enough credit. Because for all of their repetition, they're usually delivering in scope, beauty, visual diversity, and a variety of ways to approach any combat encounter. World Seeker doesn't have any of those things, and come on, did you really think that it would? The budget isn't public information, but you can guesstimate. It's an anime game based on an anime that, despite being extremely popular, isn't one of Shonen's international darlings where most of the sales are happening. So what we get is a game that feels like a budget Assassin's Creed, ironically without any of the sailing. Its world design is a concession, whose size feels like it's not even a third of what would justify a name like World Seeker, and it doesn't compensate for that lack of scale with any higher degree of authorship. Almost every inch of the districts you explore here feel like the same, maybe with the exception of the city in the middle. It's all basic green, and the first 20 minutes of gameplay will show you more or less the entirety of what you can expect from this game's visual variety. Combat doesn't fare that much better. With a single button for ranged attacks and a single button for melees, World Seeker is hoping that the ability to switch between a heavy and light combat style is enough decision making, but it barely changes how you play, being a mostly aesthetic difference for offense and a minor difference in defense, swapping out a block for a dodge. The lock-on system doesn't actually fix your camera on opponents, but instead acts as a new focal point where you can manually reset the camera, and characters who go behind you will lose the locking, and you'll have to remind me what the point of lock-on is, if not to solve that very problem. And that gets exacerbated by the game's final act, that just loves throwing flying robot enemies at you constantly. And all of that minutia is wedged into a game where the loop and design itself is fundamentally boring. You go to a new boring area, talk to the boring NPCs, do a boring quest, engage in boring combat, get materials for the boring crafting system, open boring chests, build boring equipment, send party members on boring missions, and if you're not bored yet, you can do it all again and again to fill up all these boring relationship meters or complete these boring checklists. There are insta-fail stealth sequences in this game. That sentence feels like it can be an 8-word review of this entire game. One Piece fans would get everything they need to know from that knowledge, and I can practically end the review there. And damn it, maybe I will. Can I break character for a second? This isn't what my channel is about. I celebrate games, and I'll be honest, I'm struggling as I write this script. Because this is the reason I didn't review this title back in 2019. I try to balance out my criticisms of a game by glorifying what it does well, and I can think you see why that format doesn't exactly work with this one. I'm 3 pages into a script that more accurately tracks as a list of grievances than it does a review. One Piece World Seeker doesn't excel at anything, and it tries to hide that fact by throwing a dozen underbaked systems at you. This game sucks. But you probably already knew that, didn't you? You might have known that before you even clicked on the video, and if you didn't, you certainly do now. Yet you're still here, and I think I can venture a guess as to why. You are like me. You are sick. You have a One Piece disease, one that cannot be cured. And until the antidote that is the next chapter, you must cope with the primary symptom of being incapable of getting One Piece off your mind. You will click on just about any video talking about your favorite franchise in hopes that related discussion will fire off the One Piece synapses in your brain and make you forget that this series will end one day. I lack the divine hands of our prophet who pens our holy text in black marker, and while I can never give your body what it truly needs, I can offer up better ways of filling the void than playing this game. Here's a list of ways to get your One Piece fix without playing One Piece World Seeker. Go reread Alabasta. A country divided, a leader learning to step up after the death of their mother, a secret superweapon being sought after by nefarious third parties, and Luffy solving all the above with his fists. I thought about this storyline a lot when playing Worldseeker because there are certainly a lot of similarities, and that just begs the question of why not engage with the real thing. Alabasta is the first truly huge storyline in One Piece, where the time between a villain being introduced and them getting their well-deserved gum-gum smackdown was more than one real-life year of publication, and that once being novel is a really funny thought nowadays. Go play the Grand Battle series. I've reviewed these ones independently and I'll link them in the description. They're fun, arcadey fighters that are easy to pick up and play, and really embrace the silly side of One Piece, with an emphasis on throwing random items and jumping around everywhere. They hold up nicely visually too, and were developed by the same studio that handled Worldseeker, Gambarian. Worth playing for at least a few hours to see all the special moves. Go listen to the One Piece OST. I think playing Assassin's Creed Odyssey with To the Grand Line running in the background is a better version of Worldseeker. This is also your reminder that as of March 16th, the Whole Cake Island and Wano soundtracks have finally hit the web, which is an especially shocking fact considering Whole Cake Island began airing in the anime nearly half a decade ago, locking some beautiful tracks behind your ability to hear them over the Japanese voice actors screaming their hearts out. Go reread Sky Island. This doesn't have any relation to Worldseeker. I just don't want this storyline's potentially increasing significance to the late game One Piece plot to overshadow that it is, and always has been, an excellent and complete story in its own right that holds up regardless of whether or not there are a few lines that mention a sun god. The explanation for the sighting of giants is still one of my favorite panels in the entire series, and Oda's ability to pull together a 2-year-long story and all of its threads so perfectly is where I gained unwavering confidence in his ability to end the series with the same grace. If you enjoy One Piece Worldseeker, don't let me take that away from you. It's not the worst game I've ever played, even if it is the worst at keeping my attention, and its world isn't filled with enough to be sought. If completing checklists and filling up meters jollies your Roger, then by all means. It's just that I can't think of anything more antithetical to the spirit of One Piece than that.